So hey guys, Doc here. The other day I tried to do my first ever YouTube video to show my friend my tank, and with a little encouragement he said, you know, you should try to do a better one. He liked the first videos, I kind of liked them, but they really, I mean, as far as YouTube go, weren't up to the par of the videos I see out there, so I'm going to try to, at least for the sake of him and my personal enjoyment, make a little better one about my tank. So to begin here, we got a 40-gallon breeder tank. So it's 40 gallons. They call it a breeder because instead of it being tall and long, it is kind of short and wide. So it's a shallower tank. And personally, I prefer breeder tanks over other tanks for the fact that they are shallow. Originally this was probably designed for a reptile, but it works for the same purposes for what I'm using it now as a reef tank. And the reason for that is because the light source doesn't have as much to penetrate to bring down what it needs to do for the tank. So if it was a reptile tank, it would be the heat, and for reef purposes it is the lighting, so it has less depth to make it in, so therefore I can get away with less powerful light. Makes things a little cheaper on the electrical bill. Tank's been running about almost a year now. In fact, unfortunately I'm going to be breaking it down in a few weeks to set up a bigger tank that is going to be my first reef ready tank, and I'm looking forward to it. I started out doing nano tanks under 10 gallons, and finally convinced the wife to let me move into a bigger tank. And you know, this is my first full successful reef tank. The other ones had some corals, but really weren't this successful. I think it also has to do with the amount of time that the other ones were up compared to this one. But this didn't happen overnight. This took some time. So to begin, in my tank you see two power heads here. They're the Jabeo, I think 25s. They're actually not functioning at full capacity. I got them used. They have some issues, but for what it does, it brings a good current. And the current I have moves from the front, from the back wall to the front wall, and then gets hit again with another surge current from this one and kind of pushes things around in the center. It keeps it steady, make sure the coral doesn't blow all to one side or, you know, just lay flat because it's getting hit by the current too strong. This kind of gives it a choppy current and stabilizes it in the center. Overall, the tank runs with a CPR backpack skimmer. That's it back there. It's not reef ready. I do not have anything drilled through the walls and the bulkheads of this tank. I just kind of decided to go all Hob style with it. So as you can see, there's the heater in the back, which is just a 150 watt heater. And I'm running a canister filter on it. I'm not running a sump like most people do. And this was just a necessity thing for space at the time with this tank. And it does really well. I kind of run the canister filter in the form of a media reactor. I got different pads in there for nitrates and phosphates and carbon. And I also run ChemiPure Blue, which I really like. It's like a combination mixture of filter media that absorbs most of the toxins in the water. And for what it does, it basically helps supplement the tank's natural ecosystem filter. I'm running a Current Marine Pro LED bar. It's a 46-inch bar with a dimmable timer setting on it, so it basically can come from early morning to bright of the day all the way down to dusk and complete darkness, and it simulates natural sunlight for the tank, and it basically helps the coral. From what I'm told, you know, because this coral is a wild species, even though we domesticate it in our tanks, it still functions better and grows better when you provide it with natural, like, state, basically. You want it to be as close to a natural ecosystem as possible. Therefore, the current, the light, the temperature, the feeding, the more that you can make that like nature, the better the coral will perform. So that's basically it for equipment. I manually dose. I don't have a doser. I do all that myself with Red Sea Coral Colors Pro, and I do all my water testing the old-fashioned diagnostic way. I don't have any of those fancy HANA testers. I would love to have them, but they're just way out of my price range. So a little bit about what we keep in the tank. The tank actually at one time had a lot more fish than a lot of the fish that you see in here were picked out by my son. Some of them aren't really meant for this tank, and I know there'll be people out there that'll be like, oh my god, you know, he's got that fish in this size tank. And I'd like to just kind of touch base on that real fast before the haters come in. So out in the reef keeping community, in the fish keeping community in general, there's a lot of these rules of thumb. You know, 1 inch for a fish per gallon. You know, you can't do this in this tank, you can't do that, and you know, I like to bust those myths right open. So for example, here we have a coral reef tank in a 40-gallon tank. Now back when coral reefs were first kept, I mean when people first kept saltwater tanks for that matter, it was pretty much thought that you couldn't really do saltwater in anything less than 100 gallons. People didn't even keep coral back then. They had coral skeletons. They just thought it was impossible to do. But nowadays we know that that's not true, because people are keeping reefs in less than 1-gallon tanks, you know. And a very prime example is Maritza, the reef phase. If you don't know what that is, you should really look it up. It's a 1.5-gallon reef in a flower vase that has been running successfully now for, I believe, 5 years. You know, and it's just blowing that rule of thumb where you can't do this in this size tank wide open. So the fish in the tank, yeah, they will eventually need to go in a bigger tank, but at the size that they are now, at the size when I bought them, they are fine and they are healthy. There's no signs of injury or stress, and if they do get to the point, and they will get to the point where they need to go into a bigger tank, they will be rehoused. So before we, you know, start hating on that, just know that eventually this fish will be moved into a bigger tank where he'll have more space. In fact, they're all going in a bigger tank in the next few weeks. So that's about it. Basically back to the fish incident. So I had a lot more fish. My son picked them out. Some of them weren't as compatible. One of them I got was a baby snowflake eel. When I'm talking baby, I'm talking less than 6 inches, very small, about the thickness of like a magic marker. Well, I'm sorry, like a Sharpie. And you know, he did fine. We fed him by hand. Well, just like anything, he took off in growth, especially with eating properly and being in a good tank environment. Now to the point where he's around 16 to 17 inches, about the thickness of a actual magic marker. Now, not like a Sharpie. You can pretty much fit anything into his mouth that he wants. And unfortunately, reef fish like to sleep laying down on the rock or kind of in the crevices, and at night he likes to hunt. So he became a little hungry, a little overzealous, and took a few bites out of some of the population and kind of narrowed it down to what it is now. It's sad and unfortunate, but eventually he's going to live in a new home, and at that point we'll be able to restock the fish. I have a lot of invertebrates going on in the tank. There was a giant cleanup crew at one point, but now the cleanup crew is kind of diminished because of the Huma Huma trigger you see floating around back there. He has a nasty habit of liking to punch things in the shell and knocking them off, and you know, keep repeatedly punching them until he can snack on them. I got a couple starfishes. There's some snails roaming around still in the tank. There's quite a few anemones. I got one. I think I got 2 rainbow, 1 condi, 1 corkscrew, and 1 rock flower anemone. The corkscrew is new addition. He's baby. You can't really see him. He's kind of back there right below the rock flower. That's just the place he picked. I'm hoping he comes back out. That guy back there is the hawkfish. I believe he's called the red-spotted hawkfish, and he's also a new addition. It's kind of cool. The only reason why I picked him up, one, he was on sale, and 2, Basically, he's fast. He's really quick, and that kind of helps him not get eaten by the snowflake eel. So, I mean, as far as it goes right now, he's a pretty good hider and a pretty quick swimmer, and the snowflake eel hasn't even been able to come close to catching him. I've actually watched him swim right by the snowflake eel, and the snowflake eel looked to take a bite, but by the time he even opened his mouth, that fish was gone, and I kind of hope it stays that way. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. That's what we're hoping for. We got a lot of different corals going on in the tank right now. We got toadstool, which was massive, shrunk. I thought it was gone. And then once it started dosing and the tank started bouncing back, it started extending polyps again. So now it's back to life. We got some red mushrooms there. That's a green jawbreaker mushroom that basically I got it from another friend. It was floating around the tank for months and months and months, and I thought it died, and then all of a sudden, boom, it was attached to a rock right out in the open one day, and I was like, wow, it's there. So that's where he's been for a while now. He seems to be doing well. I got some Nephelia in the back, which is like a spongy leather coral. It's kind of its own type of category. I had a lot more of it. It started to shrink off. Now it's coming back again. Again, this is all after I started regular dosing the tank. I wasn't really good at it in the beginning. It was a learning curve, and now I'm kind of back. You can see in the background there's some unnamed zoas. And then right here, the biggest colony in my tank is this Gonopora, which is massive. He's about half the size of a football. He's doing really well. He kind of loves it here, and I'm glad that he's doing so good. Bird's nest coral back there. Some Kenya tree. Got a nice hammer colony back there next to the bird's nest coral. I think I'm going to wind up moving the bird's nest coral because I'm afraid that the hammer's going to sting it. Monopora. There's some green chalice that I kind of toss in the tank. I'm hoping it does well. So far, it's a good piece. The other few small pieces didn't do so, or aren't doing so hot. More green zoas. Blueberry zoas right there in the foreground. Some Kenya tree. The pulsing Xenia. Was really small when I got him. He was kind of like that small segment down there, which is actually new. It's that only grew within the last few weeks. It was mainly this giant stalk, but I moved some of the rocks around to give it base because it was kind of just sitting on this peak of the rock, so it had really nowhere to attach and grow off of it. So it was just getting massive up there like this tree. But I moved a few rocks because I wanted it to spread, and boof, that's what it's doing right there. So it's actually doing pretty cool. More of the bird's nest is the largest colony of the bird's nest that I have there. Actually, all the bird's nest is from one colony. It kind of self-fragged when I was moving it into this tank. In the background there, sorry again for the lighting and the movement of the camera, that's the torch coral, and there's the coral beauty. That's a green tip torch, and he's fully extending his sweeper tentacles. Maybe he wants to eat, I don't know. He's probably ready for some food. There's a Duncan. So the Duncan's been in the tank for months. It's got about 5 heads on it now. I had 3 when I got it. The heads in the back seem to be doing better. This one in the front, in the foreground, I'm not really sure what's going on with him. Yeah, now the sleeper tentacles are in the way. But I'm hoping... Hang on, sorry guys. I'm hoping that it will open up. You can see it's kind of deflated compared to the rest of them. But he's been like that for weeks. It used to be they were all open and big like the back one. I think it has to do with the other coral and its presence. I might move it and see what's going on there. But it's been pretty good in that one particular spot in the tank, and I didn't want to touch it because the rest of it seems to be taking off well. $14 from Petco. It was a decent sized frag. I was pretty impressed with it when it opened up. Boom. There we go. Flower. Rock flower anemone in its glory. Just kind of chilling. He was small. Now he's big. Again, he's just chills there. Unlike the rest of the anemone, he hasn't moved around at all. He just kind of likes it there, and you know, that's where we're going to leave him, see what happens. Boom. Some more Monopora. And finally, one of the biggest colonies in the tank, the Buddha hand. It was smaller. He's a leather type coral, but he has grown, and I actually think that he's getting ready to break off like in a budding kind of mixture at those pieces down there and grow elsewhere in the